When trying to develop phenomenal aim, there are so many misconceptions that get thrown around that can actually hinder your development and prevent you from reaching your true aim potential. That's why in this video, we're going to break down the top most common aiming myths and traps that you are falling into and what you can do instead to be well on your way to superstar aim. Now, please like and subscribe if you enjoy the content and check out the Saudi Esports Academy down below. We offer top tier boot camps with many of the biggest pros in esports that help you get to the top level in gaming. Check it out right now and let's get into the video. Now, the first common myth that you will hear a lot is that there is a perfect sensitivity. This is the idea that you can find that one sense that is the best for every single player. And a lot of players see that there is an average sensitivity in most games, but fail to consider that there will always be a range. Just because there's some common sensitivity trends doesn't mean that there won't be outliers. Whether you have super fast senses like Woxic or super slow senses like Michu, here's the benefit to the different types of senses. For high sensitivity, a big benefit is that you can react to things faster and move across your screen with minimal hand movements. It potentially has a higher ceiling of improvement because it allows you to complete more actions. The lack of precision that has high sense, though, also leads to an increased need of micro adjustments. By having to spend more focus on the precision aspect of aiming, it means that the skill ceiling of this sensitivity is higher. Now, there could be diminishing returns here. Not every game is going to need to have this high of sensitivity, and there is a huge negative, an increase in strain and injury. The higher sensitivity is, the more strain you give yourself from tensing. And not only does this increase the risk of injury, but the habit of tensing your hand to limit the range of motion could slowly plateau your capability to aim in a long career. Now, the opposite, low sensitivity. First off, a big benefit is that it's more precise. A lower sensitivity is easier to be precise with, leading to an increased chance of winning gunfights and being reliable. You get more mouse control, and you might notice that when you're on a lower sensitivity, things get smoother and easy to control or track. But a negative is a lot of people don't have the desk space required to make it so you can get full use out of low sensitivity, and you're also going to need to be able to make big arm movements for long periods of time, which some people either don't like or it doesn't feel optimal for them. Because of the drawbacks of the two sensitivity types, there is not a perfect sensitivity, and people need to realize that sometimes you need a combination between low and high, or you pick the one that is perfect for you, your comfortability, your game of choice, and this is the most important thing when trying to find your sensitivity. It's okay and even recommended to constantly experiment with your sensitivity and settle on one that you truly like, but if you need to readjust, don't be afraid to do so. Now, the second big myth that people run into is the myth that they should copy other pros or people's sensitivities. This is a huge mistake, and this is ignoring your own circumstances, your equipment, or your space. You might want to copy the sensitivities of a top pro, but the reason why this isn't always good as it seems is because it completely disregards your own circumstance, from that equipment you have to the hand size of you specifically to your own personal preference and the games you play. This is actually a part of a much larger problem where people believe that just copying a streamer or a pro will make them instantly improve. And while there are things that we can learn from many of the top players, it's important to know that the way that they play and the things that they do and the equipment they have are specific to them. And players are under the impression that changing your sensitivity to a pro player is going to magically make you play like those players, which is just not true. That being said, it's okay to learn a pro player sensitivity, especially if you're trying to understand their aim styles. It isn't objectively bad, and a lot of the time it gives you a nice indication of what sensitivities help with what aim styles, and you can experiment around with what many different pros do, and maybe settle on something that you personally like. Now, lastly, while it is important to carve out your own personal settings, equipment, and sensitivity, it is also important to understand that there is a typical range, a range that people normally play in, and if you're going outside of that norm, you typically need to have a strong reason to do so. As an example, if everyone's sensitivity occupies between 5 and 10 EDPI, but your EDPI is 200, you could say, I don't fit into 99% of players, and maybe you are that different and that is the most optimal for you, but chances are you might not have done enough experimentation and research into your own sensitivity styles in order to actually decide decide what is really best. Just make sure you're not doing something just to be different and you're doing something that is optimal for you, that is going to make sure that you don't get injured. Now, moving on to number 3, aim trainers are useless or aim trainers are necessary. You typically hear both, and you typically hear it in black and white, people saying different things. So what is the truth? What are aim trainers for, and are they even useful? In the useless camp, you hear things like they're very unnecessary scenarios, or you're not practicing with accurate hero models, or you don't emulate the movement in your game. And for people in the necessary camp, you hear things like there's way more aim interactions that you can practice on a micro level, and you're focusing your attention on different aim styles, and you're getting accurate feedback instantly instead of feedback that might be convoluted with different abilities and other factors in the game, so you might lose a gunfight even if you were aiming better hypothetically. But what is the truth here? Is aim training bad or good for you? And it's really going to depend personally on what you need out of your aim and your own aim development journey, because just like anything, aim training is a tool. It's something that you could use to improve certain aspects of your aim, but it isn't the end-all be-all. You're not emulating the pressure that you feel to hit a shot in the game. You're not emulating the movement. There are so many other factors that you're not taking into account, but at the same time, you're isolating the things that you do need to focus on so that you're better at those things. I like to relate it directly to working out in a gym to trying to get better at a sport. If you're trying to get better at football, for example, working out a specific muscle in the gym might be the difference between you running a little bit faster, kicking a little bit better, or being an all-around better player. But if you're only working out in the gym and you're relying on that to make you a top-tier player, it's not simply going to be enough. So using it as a tool and finding ways that it fits into your aim training routine, I think that could be the best thing for you, but do yourself a favor and don't fall into I need it or I think it's useless. Find your own truth and move on from there. Now, the next big myth that you'll hear a lot is that a lighter mouse is better. And what is the truth here? Because we're seeing a lot of mice get lighter and lighter. So do we want the lightest mouse possible? What is the actual thing that we want to get in our equipment? And this one is a little bit tricky. So what is the statistics and what pro players do say about mice being lighter or heavier? Now, we are seeing a common trend with players moving towards lighter mice and lighter mice being overall more popular over time. But just like with sensitivity, it's not going to outweigh your ability to aim. And there are both benefits to lighter and heavier mice that we do got to talk about. For lighter mice, you're going to have hypothetical faster movement. It's going to be a lighter movement object with less resistance. So you're going to be able to move it around just a tiny bit faster, but in a lot of cases, it's going to be so marginal because both mices are relatively light compared to things that we normally move around. In addition to that, there is an argument for increased precision. With less weight to slow you down, players may find it easier to be precise in fights that are particularly fast-paced. But the last one is stopping power. And one of the benefits to a light mouse is that you take less effort to move and stop a mouse, and this allows you to actually have full control over an object. There is a lot of people arguing that the best mice would be a mouse that weighs nothing or something that only takes your hand movement into account. That being said, a heavier mouse could add things to your consistency, making it so that you have something that can ground your aim, making it so that you're less shaky and more reliable instead of more flicky, and you're almost artificially copying a lower sensitivity by adding extra resistance with a heavier mouse. In addition to that, there is a huge amount of diminishing returns, and there's a diminishing return argument to be made with lighter and lighter mice, where you're receiving benefits going from a 300-gram mouse down to a 100-gram mouse, but the race to 50 grams and 30 grams and trying to make it lighter and lighter at all possible seems that there might be huge diminishing returns, as we see many top pros consistently play on a mouse that is between the 60 to 100-gram mark and still take down tournaments, win championships, and get crowned the best players in the world. Similar to sensitivities as well, there are outliers or players that do not play with a mouse that occupies the traditional lightweight mouse of what most people play, and they still have success with it. So find what fits for you and don't just give into the hype or the wave just because everyone else is doing it. But I would definitely suggest trying multiple different mice yourself. Now, next up, we do got to talk about good aimers not needing warm-ups. And this is a myth that gets thrown around quite a bit. It really talks to specific specifically reversibility, which is the idea that a certain skill, if not practiced, will decrease over time. And although it is true that reversibility probably won't take place if a player is still playing the game consistently, players are encouraged to have warm-ups that are more intensive than the situations that they will face in game. And when I talk about players, I don't just mean any old player. I'm talking about pro players, and there's a reason why many of the best players in the world warm up before they compete. Another thing that people don't realize is that esports players warm up for the exact same reasons that athletes in traditional sports warm up. These reasons can include consistency, range of movement, avoiding injury, and mental preparation. These are some of the many reasons why it's very important to make sure that you're having a warm-up that tests you and allows you to simulate and even extend past many of the same things that you're going to have to do in a game, so that you're playing consistent and you're allowing yourself to be ready to perform at your peak potential. Myth number 6 is that you need fast reaction time to be a good aimer. And this is about a certain type of person. We all have that friend that spends half his life trying to improve his human benchmark scores, thinking that if he has 150 millisecond reaction, that means he can click heads better than you. And although the ability to react fast is definitely an advantage, my main issue with this myth is that it reduces aim to a single style when that's simply not the case. There are a lot of aim types and strategies that can be the difference between you winning and losing that have nothing to do with reaction time. First off is crosshair placement. Putting your crosshair at the head height appropriate for the enemy's swing and peak, allowing you to be prepared and have a certain amount of prediction to your gunfights. Combine that with pre-fire, making it so that you're actually fighting with your brain and not just your aim, knowing when and where enemies would be. Tracking is something that is also very important, not about the one individual shot that you're making at the start, but the consistent tracking of an enemy as they're on your screen and being able to follow that with consistent aim, and the creativity and the reactivity of you as a player. There's a lot of ways to take smarter engagements and make up the difference with small changes in reaction time. And it is also important that while reaction is something that you can practice and improve with health, diet, and many of the other things we will cover in a future video, it's something that doesn't make or break a top pro. And we see pro players compete at the highest level with various reaction times, and you can become a top tier pro or a world champion without being in the top 50% of reaction times at the highest level. Now moving on to number 7, the higher the frames, the better the aim. Now I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Frames do matter, and having more frames is going to make things feel smoother, and you're going to have less of a feeling of discomfort, and most importantly, you're going to probably enjoy playing and practicing a bit more. That being said, frames take up a small percentage of the entire factor of a player, and you are most likely going to lose to every single aimer, even one skill tier above you, even if you're operating at more than double their frames. Now, also, there's a huge diminishing return factor here. Going from 10 frames to 60 frames is basically the difference between being able to see and not see. Going from 60 to 144 is definitely changing the game when it comes to FPS. But past that, more and more, you're going to feel that diminishing returns, and you're not going to get any of the huge benefits you felt in those earlier frames. So while higher frames can be important, it's not going to improve your aim dramatically enough to say that it makes the player. Now moving on to number 8, aiming is just arm/wrist/fingertip motion. And this is something that a lot of people will state is why you can have a sort of muscle memory when it comes to aiming. You can learn a certain movement and ingrain it into your actual physical muscles and physicality, and you can replicate it every single time. But there are other factors that I think people are not considering that ruin this notion. The first one is eye focus. Eye focus is an unsung hero when it comes to aiming, and I think a lot of people overly focus on just the aim, the risk, the motion of the thing without actually identifying things to look at and the discipline to be scanning your screen for information and when to be looking at your target versus to be looking at your crosshair. Another thing that's important is that every process starts in the brain, so it goes brain, eyes, then hands, and it's really important to think about aiming before you're doing the aiming itself, and then once you acquire your target with your eyes, your hand should already start to move. This is something important, creating that mind-body connection and not just trying to figure out how to repeat something so many times that you have that repetition built into your muscles. Instead, this is never going to allow you to have consistent aim and is not something that you should be striving for. So essentially, try not to oversimplify something that actually requires a bit more thinking. Next up is knowing how to aim in one game will mean you can aim in all games. This is something that a lot of people think, and there are truths and falsehoods in this one. The first one is a game example, Valorant versus Overwatch. And if we take that as a prime example, you ever realize that the majority of Overwatch players that go into Valorant perform pretty average as far as pros go? But this isn't because Valorant is harder to aim in. There's a lot of differences between the games. And the first one we'll talk about is sensitivities. Sensitivities in Valorant are going to be fundamentally less than sensitivities in Overwatch on average, mainly because of the difference in aim styles and the slow-paced strategy of Valorant versus the high-paced, tracking-based game of Overwatch. When you have the movement being different and you have the aim styles being different and the sensitivity being different, you start to create a much different type of player that has a lot of different types of skills that need to be relearned and reinforced in order to even reach a fraction of your skill set in other games. While some parts of your skill will transfer, especially depending on the characters you play and the type of aiming that you incorporate across games, it's not always going to be the truth, and that's why you have top tier pros in one game going to another and getting destroyed by low-level players. The last misconception is that crosshairs don't make you better at the game. They don't really matter, so just slap any on there and call it a day. And this is a really fun one because it's one that we're all guilty of playing into. I don't know if anyone actually believes that this is the case, but I know that every single one of you watching this have died in a gunfight and instantly decided to go change your crosshair. And this is surely because we lost the gunfight, right? Because of that crosshair. It's like we've been running the same crosshair for years with no issue, and it's definitely not because we've stayed up all night consuming caffeine and queuing a rage-filled ranked session. Now, visual obstruction can be real, but unless you're running a crosshair like this, it wasn't your main issue. And it's important to understand that crosshairs can be tools, and the best crosshairs can have things like contrast, but at the same time not actually cover up any of the things that you need to focus on, but they're not going to make or break a player. But having one crosshair over another isn't going to turn you into a pro player overnight, and if you're finding yourself constantly swapping your crosshair, maybe you have another problem, like a bad sensitivity, or you're not warming up enough and your consistency is at play here. Now, regardless, this comes to the end of our video, and I hope you enjoyed the 10 biggest aiming myths, but feel free to drop any other crazy myths that I missed out on in the comments down below, and we could talk about them together. And like and subscribe if you enjoyed the content, and check out the Saudi Esports Academy, where we run top-level boot camps with the best pros in the world that can teach you exactly how to become a top-tier pro yourself. Check it out right now in the links down below.